Hi, I'm Jackie Tantillo, and this is Should Have Listened to My Mother. Isolation, seclusion, loneliness, and the list goes on and on. The emotional and psychological impact this pandemic is having on generations is overwhelming. And I'm not just referring to children. I'm talking about the toll it's taking on adults. Julie Jargon is the Family and Technology Columnist at the Wall Street Journal. And in a recent column, Moms in Middle Age, Rarely Alone, Often Online, and Increasingly Lonely. Social media has both helped and hurt Gen X mothers dealing with burnout and loneliness during the pandemic. And Julie has interviewed a number of women for this article, and she's here to share what she uncovered from Moms Under Duress. Hi, Julie, and welcome to Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So first of all, I want to say congratulations to you because you are the very first family and tech columnist at the Wall Street Journal, correct?
That's right. Thank you.
2019. That is very impressive. Good for you. And you're a mom, so you can totally relate to this family stuff.
I am, and I'm also a Gen X mom, so I can certainly relate to the column I just wrote as well.
And actually, you have a follow-up to that article, I think, too. So remind me if I forget to ask what the follow-up to this article was. But it caught my eye because that's what this podcast is about. It's about moms. And I'm so thankful that you wanted to be on this show. Now, just so we clarify, Gen X is basically just after baby boomers, 65 to 1980 age group?
Yeah, roughly, 41 years old to 57 years old. But, I also included in my column a woman who's 38, so she's not technically in the Gen X age range, but she had a very relevant story in that she has, her oldest child is 20 years old, her youngest is 11, so she had a hard time meeting other moms because in her oldest child's friend group, she was usually the youngest mom, and among the mothers of her youngest child, she's on the older end. So, this is something that's relevant, I think, to women of many different ages, even if they're not specifically in the Gen X window.
For the most part, I think parents are often telling their kids, especially during the pandemic, and actually pre-pandemic, get off your phone, get off social media. It's not healthy. Women and moms have now gone to this exact same thing that their kids are hooked on.
Yes, I mean, moms were on social media before the pandemic, but when the pandemic started, it was, social media was the place that everyone went to find a connection, including moms, including middle-aged moms, going to Facebook and trying to find a shared experience with other people who are experiencing life in lockdown and trying to juggle managing remote school and maybe working from home, all of the stressors of the pandemic that kind of fell on the weight of the shoulders of moms. So a lot of women, really tried to turn to other women like them, and social media was a big place where they went to find.
It's a lifeline. It's a lifeline, right?
Absolutely.
But you found something else out about this so-called lifeline.
Yeah, for a lot of women, they felt that a lot of the time they spent on social media didn't end up really helping always. That one mom that I talked to said that social media made her feel less isolated but more lonely, which I thought was a really interesting and kind of poignant way of stating it. That you can see all sorts of people on social media, you can see what they're doing, but sometimes what you're seeing can make you feel like you're missing out on something. It's just like the teenagers that have the fear of missing out because they see their friends getting together and maybe they're left out of something. I think the same thing really started to happen, especially during the pandemic, for middle-aged moms who might not have had a close friend group locally that they could turn to, and who on either their personal feeds or within Facebook groups that they were part of, they would see perhaps other moms, getting together, going on girls' nights out or going on trips, and feeling like, why don't I have that group of close female friends? around me that I can go and do that with.
It's so hard when you're seeing other people out and about, and it's like, well, wait a minute, I haven't talked to anybody in the longest time, let alone gone out and had a meal or a cup of coffee
Exactly.
or a drink. And the touch factor, the hugs from people is something that I really miss. Just being able to embrace somebody, that's an important part for me. So what's the solution? What do you do?
Well, I followed it up with a column because I got so many emails from readers who said, okay, I really relate to this, but yeah, what do I do? What do I do about it? And so I did a follow-up column. I tried to reach out to friendship coaches, which I learned are a thing, and they had a lot of really good advice. And the starting point really is to not be afraid to show your vulnerability and just ask for what you want. If you don't ask, no one's going to just show up on your doorstep and say, hey, I want to be friends. You have to take the initiative. And that's hard to do, especially if you're introverted or you've been out of practice because you've been in a pandemic bubble for the last 2 years. But some of the coaches I spoke with provided some good tips on how to do that. And one way is, just to go up to people when you're out and about in your neighborhood, at your park, and just talk to other parents. That's a natural kind of conversation starter. You're talking about your kids, and then it leads to hopefully other conversation. But even if that's uncomfortable, I found that a lot of people are trying to do this virtually. I've heard of people posting local Facebook groups or on Nextdoor saying, I'm a middle-aged mom. I'm looking for some girlfriends. Does anybody want to join me to start a group to go out and have dinner or go to trivia night? So some people are just putting it out there on social media in hopes that they can take some of that offline and create some in-person friendships.
It's been especially hard for adults, but I think we more often hear the stories of the toll it's taking on kids and teenagers. It's ironic, isn't it? They always want to be on their computer, but then when they have to be on their computer for class, it's not the same thing. When does mom get a break? She's been juggling this same routine for so long, but she doesn't have any kind of outlet.
Yeah, I think, all of those things were true before the pandemic. Moms have always been busy and they've always been juggling it all. But there was always sort of a release valve. You'd go to maybe to pick up your kids from school, and you'd have other parents to chit-chat with, or, you'd run and meet a friend for coffee, or you'd go to an exercise class. All of those things were ways that we could vent and let out a little bit of that stress of being a mom. But all of that disappeared during the pandemic, and so it became a very lonely time for a lot of women, and it still is for a lot of women as this pandemic is continuing on. And so, I think women are just kind of hungry at this point for some connection.
Other than the feeling of missing out, and you mentioned the loneliness, is there any other specific details that you remember that some of the mothers shared with you?
I think, some of it is just the difficulty of making time to meet with other people. That's something I heard a lot is, as much as these women want to have friends and to do things with, where's the time? You get to the end of the day and you're exhausted. You're trying to maintain your household, work, if you have a job, take care of your children, tend to their emotional needs, and it's, which have been so significant during the pandemic. What is there left for you at the end of the day? You're tired.
You're tired? You haven't taken a shower in 3 days?
You haven't taken a shower? Yeah. You're going to pick up the phone and have an hour-long conversation with your best friend. You may want to, but you're busy. Your best friend's busy. That's what, that kind of is what goes by the wayside, unfortunately, even though we should be prioritizing friendships because there's been tons of research that shows how important friendships are to people's physical health and mental health. And so it shouldn't be this kind of side thing that we do when we, as a luxury. We should treat it as a luxury. We should treat it as something that's really important to do. And that's what, some of the advice that I offered in my follow-up column is to try to find creative ways to carve out time. And it doesn't have to be this big, happy hour or this long brunch, or this dinner out or a girls' trip. It can be smaller. It can be, you can steal like little moments. And one of the ideas I really like that sort of gained popularity on social media lately is the idea of going on errand dates with your friends. You have to go to the grocery store. Why not go to the grocery store at the same time as your friend? and you can chat while you're strolling through the aisles and picking up cereal. So part of it is just kind of rethinking what it means to make friends and to be a friend. So it doesn't have to be grandiose gestures. You can show your friends that you're thinking of them in smaller ways. You know, when you find an article that resonates with you, that you think they would enjoy, send it to them. Send them a funny video. And also make a conscious effort to book time with your friends. So, for example, you know, we've all been in a scenario where we run into someone that we haven't seen in a long time. We say, oh, we should get together, but nothing ever happens. That's because you don't plan anything, and it just kind of falls to the wayside like so many other things. So, you know, some people have suggested pulling out your phone and bringing out the calendar right then and there and saying, yes, let's get together, and let's do it on this date. And that way it's planned, because for a lot of people, if it's not on the calendar, it doesn't happen.
Oh, so often. You're like, oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in the longest time. Let's do something. And then, you know, months go by, which is just terrible and yet totally understandable. I totally get it. Julie, have you ever noticed if geographic parameters play a role on moms struggling, urban versus rural locales?
What I have found, and this is not scientific, but what I've found in terms of the response I've gotten and the reporting I did initially was that this is a pretty universal experience, and it doesn't matter if you're in a big city surrounded by people or if you're in a rural area or you're in a suburb. This is kind of the life experience for moms everywhere. There may be different outlets for, you know, getting out depending on where you are. It might be easier if you're in a warm weather climate to go to the park and meet people in your neighborhood in January, February. And that might be harder to do in other places. However, I think the sentiment is pretty much a shared one from what I can tell.
So as the tech reporter, family and tech reporter for the Wall Street Journal, my guest, Julie Jargon, have you clocked or written down the stats for how much time you're on media or on your computer?
I recently looked at my, for a different column I was reporting, actually, I looked at my stats for the week to see what app I had been on most. And I expected that I would see maybe Facebook or Instagram on there, but I was surprised when I saw that the amount of time the app I spent the most time on in that particular week was the iMessage app for the phone. I had spent more than 3 hours in that week texting people. And this was not even a work week, it was a week I had off. So I'm sure it's much higher during work weeks when I'm texting my editor and other people all the time. That was kind of eye-opening for me. Computer time, I mean, I'm on my computer from the time I wake up until the time I kind of close the screen to kind of stop for the day. So, you know, I'm online and on my computer
all the time. Yeah.
All the time.
It's an occupational hazard. We're so lucky to have all this information at our fingertips, but it has to come with some sort of balance, right? You have a daughter?
I have 3 kids. One of them is a daughter. Yeah.
3 kids? Do they ever say, Mom, get off your computer?
All the time. But it's usually, Mom, get off your phone. Yeah. Because I'm checking my email or my text messages or Slack for work, you know, and I'm out about in the house and not in my home office, you know, sometimes in the evenings, because messages are coming in all the time. Yeah, and they tell me, you know, especially my youngest, he's 7, stop looking at your phone.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
From the mouths of babes, right? So that's it. They see us doing it. You see all the little kids with their phone up to their ear pretending that they're having a conversation. They mimic us. They mimic the adults. So do you have conversations with them about monitoring your media intake or anything?
I do. We have conversations like that all the time. And my oldest, who's 11, he's particularly interested in my columns, and he asks me often what I'm writing about. So we have a lot of great conversations, and a lot of the stuff is a little bit more relevant to him since he's getting a little older. He doesn't have a phone, but he plays video games, and he talks with his friends on his PlayStation. And, he has an iPad, but he's not on any social media. But we have a lot of discussions about social media use and tech use. So I hope that my voice will be in the back of their heads as they get older and maybe make them stop and think about certain things.
Yeah, we really have to this whole thing has so many levels and layers to it, right? Of what our kids are going to mirror our behavior, and it's like whether it's for work or this social outreach, they're our lifeline, right? The phone and the computer. So it's going to be very interesting. There was something interesting in your article about a study done in Italy.
Yes. There was a study done in Italy conducted during the lockdown phase of the pandemic there, and they found that really what it came down to is that social media is no substitute for in-person social interactions. You know, it was helpful to an extent in terms of people being able to connect with each other, but it was determined that it just wasn't the same. And it's just as helpful as social media can be to provide that lifeline, which it did for many people and still is doing for many people during this pandemic, it's just not the same as having that real life face-to-face discussion and that hug. So, it's as with so many things, social media can be good, and it can also contribute to these feelings of stress and anxiety and loneliness.
Right, especially the Italians. I'm Italian, but when you go to Italy, you get love and emotion and effervescence, and and for them to not be able to sit down to those meals that are just so beautiful, not only to look at, but so delicious to eat, it's really hard. And I believe in the beginning of the pandemic, when Italy was hit very, very hard, all those videos were coming through about the performers, people performing on their balconies, the Italian opera singers and musicians all sending that message across the world that we were going to make it through. And that was like 2 years ago, a little bit less than 2 years ago. So it definitely, there'll be so much written about this topic for sure. And hopefully we'll know how to help moms and kids heal and get through all of this. Now, I'm curious, did any dads want to chime in on this article? Or did wives mention, any of the moms rather, mention anything about how it was more challenging because their husbands were having a tough time too? They weren't getting the support at home?
Well, so I received a lot of emails from men who said, this is not just a women's problem. Men are feeling lonely too. And I was, I mentioned in the very top of my column that prior to the pandemic, there was a lot of research done and conversations about loneliness and how it often, focused on men being lonely. And there was, there were TED Talks, and there were, studies written about the loneliness epidemic, and in large part the focus was on men. And generationally speaking, middle-aged women weren't all that lonely before the pandemic. But, the reason I wanted to write about this is because there was a study that showed that women of this age group showed the sharpest rise in loneliness after the pandemic started. So I didn't mean to exclude men. There's been a lot written about men. Everybody's been lonely during the pandemic in one way or another. It's unfortunately a pretty universal experience. And so I have heard from a lot of men who wrote in to say, midlife men are feeling lonely too. What tips do you have for us? And I think the tips that I provided in my follow-up column, I hope to be, something that anybody can take from. Yeah, some of the women I spoke to said that their husbands didn't seem to be craving the company of male friends during the pandemic the way the women were craving the company of their female friends during the pandemic. It's hard to generalize and say with any scientific certainty whether that is true, but I can speak for my own situation. I mean, I think my husband was pretty happy being at home with with us during the pandemic, and maybe the friendship outlets for men and women have some differences in terms of women really highly valuing the opportunity to gab with their friends and get together. So I think there might be some differences there, but
we're all in the same boat. We're all in the same boat. We just handle it differently, I guess. And women are usually more open and more apt to talk about their feelings. Maybe men are not as open for the most part.
Yeah. I found actually a fair amount of studies that showed that men do feel very lonely too, but are sometimes reluctant to admit it or to recognize and name it, what that feeling is. So, yeah, it's interesting. I'm hoping that things will start to clear up a little bit this spring in terms of the pandemic, and people might start feeling that it's safer and more comfortable to get together with others. I'm starting to see that myself. Just in terms of, I'm in California, our case numbers are going down quite a bit, and I think there's a renewed sort of comfort level in doing some of the pre-pandemic activities we haven't done in so long. I've been getting so many birthday party invitations for kids' birthday parties all of a sudden. I've been getting a lot more, invitations from friends to go out and do things. So I feel like there's maybe some hope on the horizon, and I hope it lasts and that it's sustainable.
Oh, I hope so too. And for everyone's sake, we all hope that we can stay healthy and the world start opening up. That's what I wish for. Julie Jargon is my guest from the Wall Street Journal, and you also have a newsletter that if people are interested in, they can find that online?
Yes, you can go to WSJ.com/newsletters and scroll down until you see the Family and Tech newsletter, and you can just slide the button over to subscribe. It's free, comes out every week. So if you're interested, please subscribe.
And I'll have that information on my Simplecast page as well. So we can keep in touch with what Julie's uncovering. And again, I will mention congratulations on being the first family and tech columnist for the Wall Street Journal. That's very impressive. I'm very happy for you. And hopefully we're going to have another conversation, you and I, as we move through this pandemic. And we'll be having a brighter, more optimistic and positive conversation as to what moms and mothers and women are up to.
That is my hope, too. Thank you for having me.
You bet, Julie. Thank you so much. Julie Jargon, The Wall Street Journal. And I wanted to remind everybody that you can always find my podcast on social media under my Should Have Listened to My Mother page or Jackie Tantillo page. And I also have a YouTube channel as well. And I want to send a big shout out to KPPQLP in Ventura, California. You can also use the MyTuner app, and they are at 104.1 FM. Thank you, my loyal listeners. I love you so much. We'll be back next week with another episode. I'm Jackie Tantillo, and say hello to your mom.